Right, so this is going to be a follow-up to my earlier video in which I talked about my early life experience growing up in the 1990s. In this, I want to talk about the 90s more broadly, more generally, in terms of cultural factors and what interesting things happened at the time. And indeed, something very interesting and very remarkable happened in the 90s, which I believe more people are beginning to talk about. Something that is definitely worthy of our attention. And I never quite had the vocabulary to express this. I didn't, because words are thinking tools, phrases and concepts. And if you lack the words or the phrases, then it's difficult to make an observation. It's difficult to remark upon something if you simply don't have the thinking tools to express it. But there's at least a handful of people, highly influential people, who have come to the same conclusion about this. And there might be some disagreements or variation on when this happened exactly. Some people say that it happened in the mid-90s, others say it happened in the late 90s, at the turn of the century, during the millennium, but we can agree to disagree. But anyway, what is it that happened in the 90s that made the 90s such a turning point? Well, there's a couple of things that happened, but the first thing I want to focus on is the death of the monoculture. So this first came to my attention. Actually, to be honest, I'd always secretly suspected this to be the case. As I was a teenager growing up into an adult, I always wondered about this, but again, I never had the words or the vocabulary to express it. But something felt a bit off about the way culture had been presented to us ever since the late 90s. It just felt like ever since then, everything's been the same. The music trends have all just been recycled. Films have never really improved in quality or explored anything new. It has become more and more difficult to discern from any visual or sound-based artifact from the late 90s to the present day and identify which point in time, which year it came from. Loads of people are starting to talk about this. And this first came to my attention when I saw a video by Michael Spicer. Now, Michael Spicer is a lefty BBC comedian, and I'm not a huge fan of Michael Spicer, but this video I thought was actually he was definitely onto something. And this is the first video that got me thinking, sorry, I need to move somewhere where I won't be blinded by the light of the sun. So anyway, I can't remember what the video was called, but it was something like, why we have been stuck in the year 1999, or something like, we're still living in the 90s. And in the video, he talks about how basically all the movie trends and all the music trends have just sort of been the same. There have been whereas in the past, it used to be the case that there are new waves of music, fashion, and visual entertainment that have come and gone. They've had their time in the limelight, but then they've been replaced by new trends. There was disco, there was punk, then there was new wave, then there was hair metal, then there was grunge, then there was house music, etc. But weirdly enough, around the time of the mid to late 90s, Michael Spicer says it's the late 90s, I guess some people disagree, there was a turning point by which we stopped seeing new trends appear. And what instead began to happen is that all the music trends that had ever existed up to that point, they began to crystallize. And we're no longer seeing the predominance or the preeminence of one over the other. I feel like this is what a lot of people have in mind when they criticize modern music. Because modern music, I would say, well, yes, in terms of technology, you know, we've certainly gotten better at composing music. We have synthesizers that are far more functional and have far more bells and whistles than was possible before then. You don't even need a computer to compose music anymore. You don't even need to compose anything. You can use AI to, you know, to generate music with the click of a finger and just a couple of sentences worth of word prompts nowadays. But it's not groundbreaking in the sense that it was before the late 90s. And this is what Michael Spicer talks about. It's been a while since I last saw that video, but he's not wrong to say this. I don't know if any of you have watched The Matrix, that sci-fi thriller action movie with Keanu Reeves that was done by the, what were they called? Wachowski brothers. But I find it quite significant how the plot of the movie is that Neo realizes that the whole world he thought he's been living in his life was a simulation built and maintained by a complex network of machines. And when he finally wakes up and realizes that he's in the actual real world, where the world around him has been destroyed, the world he knows was blown to bits by a war of humans versus machines, he finds out, Morpheus tells him about everything that's happened, and he tells him that the year 1999 was the year where we basically reached the apex of our civilization. And that's why, and that is the world, the year 1999 is the year that Neo is most familiar with. Or Mr. Anderson. And yeah, I've seen lots of people comment this on the YouTube comments section. It certainly does feel like we've been stuck in a time loop ever since then. Now, that's not to say that nothing has ever changed since the late 90s. I mean, if you compare, for instance, clips from advertisements or film trailers or stuff like that to present day, there are some differences you definitely notice. First of all, mobile phones were a lot newer and a lot more primitive back then. You probably see a lot of people with Nokia brick phones. I actually used to have one ages ago. I think it was a Siemens. And ringtones, I remember, used to be fun little things that I would just sit in the car and listen to. But now you can have an entire music library on your phone. I have basically my entire Apple Music library, which comprising of something like nearly 100 gigabytes on this phone. So way more than you could possibly dream of. You know, flip phones have come and gone. But yeah, that's the glaring obvious difference. Cars is another thing, because the vehicles we have now, there's a lot more electric vehicles. A lot of them are bigger. There's way more people driving SUVs and you know, Nissan Qashqais or Ford Raptors. I'm not really that literate when it comes to describing cars, but there's definitely a difference in terms of the color and patina. And I think the design of a lot of cars is different too. So that's one thing. And most irritatingly, one thing I will say, and you guys will probably disagree with me on this, depending on what your point of view is, but there's a difference in fashion as well. There's way more people in this day and age who have tattoos and piercings than there ever were in the 90s. And that's a thing that I regret, because I've never liked those. I find them disgusting and absolutely vulgar. And there's definitely, it's not that there were never tattoos and piercings in the late 90s. I mean, if you look at the music video for You Get What You Give by the New Radicals, there's a handful of people who have them in that music video. But it was less common. It was definitely comparatively less common than it is nowadays. I remember there used to be a stigma. There used to be a real stigma of getting a tattoo. Like, it used to be, it was something that you would gossip and talk about. I remember my sister once teasing, she was telling me about how she heard from a friend of a friend that the lead singer of this pop punk band that I never liked, Busted. I think his name was Charlie Simpson. She was telling me how apparently he had a tattoo on his willy, on his penis. That's the kind of thing that you'd laugh about as a kid. But now, who doesn't have a tattoo on their nether regions or their arms or wherever? But anyway, those are probably the only differences you would notice. For the most part, it does seem quite difficult to be able to pin down which year, which time period, which temporal epoch a certain visual clip or sound is from. It's getting increasingly harder to distinguish because something really remarkable happened in the 90s, as I said, and that was the death of the monoculture. There's at least 2 YouTubers who've made videos about this. Michael Spicer is the first one. Also, there's another guy, I think his name is Nation Squid, and the video, he made a video called Why Were the 90s Like That? Or Why Were the 90s So 90s? Or something like that. And it really helped clarify and solidify my understanding. So, as it's pretty self-explanatory, the death of the monoculture is, it used to be the case that all fashion trends, music trends, aesthetic and cultural trends whatsoever, they were all transmitted, they were all imparted to you via mainstream institutions like the radio, the wireless, the television. But around the time of at the turn of the century, some say the mid-90s or the late 90s, but the internet began to enter people's lives. It was no longer seen as specifically a tool for working and sending emails. It was now a recreational hub where people went to hang out with other people and socialize, where people would play video games with each other. And definitely by the next decade, the 2000s, we would start to see more and more people using broadband internet, and we'd gradually it would snowball to a point where there would eventually be more people using the internet than they would be spending time offline, which is certainly the case now. And that was very interesting because it was around this is what caused the death of monoculture. The birth of the internet. The internet truly has changed everything. I have hardly any recollection of what living in the pre-internet world was like. I've talked about most of that in my other video where I discussed my life in the early 90s. But obviously, my real formative years, you know, from the ages 0 to about 16 or 17, I have no notion of what living life was like before the internet was widely adopted. So I personally can't say what life was like. But I have heard from other people that it was very different in a lot of ways. I mean, for one, it used to be a lot of people would share these stories, these completely unverifiable and unsubstantiated rumors called urban legends about, there's so many of them, they've all been compiled into a book somewhere, about how there was a serial murderer hiding in the trunk of someone's car, and there was a car that tried ramming into them. So the panicked, the driver would veer off road and try and escape. But he later found out that the car that bumped into him, he was trying to warn him that there was actually a serial murderer in the trunk of his car. So he opened the trunk of his car, and out he came and got him. Or the one with the girl and the dog who's lying under her bed. These stories would be shared everywhere in school. But obviously, when the internet came along, suddenly you ended up with things like Wikipedia. You had so much free, easy access information, it became really easy to verify whether something was factually true or false. So the mystique, the mysterious aura of the unknown, that kind of disappeared when the internet came along. Now the population was a lot more grounded in reality and common sense. That's not to say that all the information is accurate or that it's still possible to not believe the evidence that you see or read on the internet, but that's a bit of a different matter. That's Yeah, no, I won't get into that until maybe that's a different subject for a different video. But anyway, the internet brought a lot of easy to access information, and the information, it's kind of made us more cynical. I think there's a sense of wonder and intrigue living in a period where urban legends, rumors, or myths can spread without being verified or fact-checked. And I think that's there was a point before the internet. It was before the internet became widely adopted that was a key insight as to what the world was like before then. But yeah, no, so the death of the monoculture and the birth of the internet, it was a really significant. It was a significant. I would even go so far as to call it a revolution. I think people actually did call it a revolution. What did they call it? The Revolution 2.0 or the Information Age, something like that. But there was definitely a before and after. And it's difficult to appreciate just how different the world is, and how weirdly, conversely, how different it is, but how similar it appears to be, and how little appears to have changed since then. It's very strange. Maybe I should have drafted a speech or written some notes, but I got to give you these thoughts while they're still fresh. But anyway, yes, the death of the monoculture, that is definitely that's a huge. So that had a tremendous impact on Western culture around the world, global culture since then. Things have definitely changed since then.